Hey everybody, I'm the Bat Otter, and in this video I wanted to talk about JojoLands. Now why do I want to do that? First of all, it's the part that's currently being released. It just started, so it's very fresh for the picking. There's a lot of things that we can speculate on right now, and speculation is a big part of what keeps serialization and manga, TV, movies. It's a big part of what keeps them going, right? It's a big part of the hype. It's a big part of what makes the fan base. The fan base is that we can all talk about it till the days end, until the author ends, until all of us are gone and still have more to talk about. Secondly, this could very well be the final part of JoJo. Now, while that may sound, oh yeah, duh, it's the final part. We're just now getting it. You might have to take a second to really feel the weight of that. Imagine if tomorrow you started writing a story or you started on a project and this project took you 40 years to complete. That's what we're looking at right here. If JoJoLands goes until 2028, which may sound far away, but it's what, 2023 right now? That's only 5 years away. 5 years. Think about that. 5 years. That's the length of somebody's high school career, just about. Imagine you were in high school, freshman year. You think 4 years, that's so far away. Then you graduated college in the blink of an eye. How fast, how long is 5 years really? It's not that long. So in 5 years, this series could be over. That's 40 years of JoJo because I believe it started in 1988. That's a big deal. That's a big accomplishment to be able to have a series run for 40 years straight with interest being kept, multiple revivals along the way, and an ever evolving art style that people pick up on regardless. People are very, very resistant to change. That's a very natural behavior. Yet Araki changes his art style every single part, and that's what keeps people coming back. It's like the worst thing that you could do is change something that works, right? His art style worked. It was buff, guys. Everybody loved it. He changes it, it works. He goes against some of his editors' better intention, it works. Araki can do something that shouldn't work in any other regard, and yet it does anyway. If you don't find that interesting, I'm not sure what you're doing. But on top of that, the topic that I really wanted to bring up was this idea that I got from reading a book the other day. Now, I read books. I don't know if you guys read books, but I read books. This book is about an artist who is unfortunately gone. And the book is analyzing the last 20 years of this artist's work. And the writer, Leah Cardus, great writer by the way, you guys go check her out, mentions an idea that I had never really heard of. It's a simple idea that you might think, oh, well, I've thought of that, but you really haven't. It's called lateness. And this idea of lateness is as simple as it sounds. It is an artist's or musician's late style. And according to a Palestinian and a European who both published essays on the topic, ironically, those essays were released posthumously because they died before they were published. It's characterized by a very conflicting feeling. There's lots of tension, there's lots of build up, and there's a lot of things that seem to go against what the artist's character had been established in years prior. But because they're facing the end of their life, they go out with a bang. And they have some of their most skilled but also unconventional work that they've ever put out. And it got me thinking because she expanded on the topic and began to talk about the musician in question's late style. Like I said, their last 20 years. And they bring up an interesting point that in this musician's late style, it is littered from end to end self-reference. And while you might think, well, people reference themselves all the time, there's nuance to it. There's a lifetime of work, a lifetime of mythology and lore built up around a single person and their work that they go back, and anybody who's been listening to them from the very beginning or just started listening to them are going to pick up on all these very, very intense themes that you can't do in a younger age, that you can't do when you're 20. Because it's the experience, it's the life lessons, it's everything that you've learned, it's everything that you've seen along the way, and it's the confrontation of mortality. Now, before you guys go off thinking that I'm crazy, I don't think that Araki is going to get that deep with JoJoLands, right? But I'm explaining to you guys the idea. I'm going to give you guys the most extreme part and reel you back in later. And they extrapolated the idea to that of a black hole. Whenever a star expands and gets to the final stages of its life, the biggest stars will implode on themselves. And I thought that was very fascinating because what is that other than self-reference if you apply it metaphorically? Self-reference is you're going back into your mind, taking out all these things that you had in the past, and you're doing something new with them, something better with them, and something that nobody expected. You're taking the expected and you're making it, excuse me, you're taking the conventional and making it unconventional. Now that's kind of interesting, right? Now let's apply that to the last two parts of JoJo, this part included. Steel Ball Run, JoJolian, and currently JoJoLands. Well, the self-reference is obvious. People have been pointing that out from Jump Street, right? Johnny Joestar, Gyro Zeppeli, the idea that Zeppelis are always going to die helping Joestars. A lot of the character names, Dio's back, a lot of the concepts. Obviously, Part 8 was a redux of Part 4, right? But you might think, well, what about the conflicting nature, right? Because it's obvious, all of the self-reference that Araki is putting into this work. Well, let's get to that, right? In Part 8, and in every other part of JoJo, from 1 through 6, you had a very clear villain. Part 1, you had Dio. Part 2, you had the Pillarman. Part 3, you had Dio again. Part 4, now that's the interesting one, because Part 4 is the only part in that 6-part series that took a little bit longer to establish the overarching villain. That was Yoshikage Kira. Now then you get to Part 5. Who was the villain there? Diavolo. I think that Part 5 is just Part 3, but different, right? uh, then you get to Part 6. Who was the villain there? Pucci, Dio. Very clear, very concise from the very beginning. Now in Part 7, that's whenever things start to change a little bit. That's whenever you start to slowly dive in to that self-reference and start to expand more on it. You had the idea of the antagonist of that part. You had the idea of the corpse very early in Part 7, but you didn't really have the villain until much later. Or at least the villain didn't start acting until much later. Now you get to Part 8. And I think Part 8 is really when it becomes obvious. And that is, who was the main overarching villain in Part 8? You had the Rokakaka fruit, right? You had the effectively drug trade going on, because that's really what was happening there. But you didn't have a villain until the last part of Part 8. I'd argue the last quarter, not even the last third. And that was the head doctor, or Toru. Now, Toru had shown his influence throughout the part. He was the head honcho. He was Walter White in that instance. But he didn't appear until the very end. And what do we get in the very end? We don't get some crazy, crazy stand battle. We get something that is so complicated. And Araki, having used fate throughout his entire career as a means for the good guys always beating the bad guys, he uses that and he gives it to the bad guy. That is Calamity. The stand itself, as Araki had said in previous parts, you want to visualize the power. You want the ability to be seen. That's why he got rid of Hamon, because you couldn't really see it. Yet here he comes with the main antagonist of a part, the main driving factor that is against Josuke and Yasuo and the Higashikata family. The driving factor is invisible, only personified through the stand, Wonder of You, and the head doctor. But even then, it's all Calamity around them. He takes 2/3 of the part to establish the main villain. The main villain shows up, and his ability cannot be seen. And neither can Josuke's. It's these two natural forces fighting one another. Now, getting into this part here, Part 9, JoJoLands, we can't really tell. But what we can tell is this. Araki blasted us into the story, and while we don't have a main antagonist just yet, he's blasting us in from a part that was very slow moving and very slice of life and very much a redux of Part 4. An attempt to make Part 4 better, right? Indirectly, of course. And we have a part that might be just as small. It's not going to be Steel Ball Run level. It doesn't seem. But that's the fun part now, isn't it? Because the idea is, He's going to take something that we expect and subvert it. He's going to subvert our expectations in a way that shouldn't work, but will end up working. Now, what do you guys think of that? And to sum it all up and finish up the video, the question is, why is breaking down this late style so important? All this self-reference of imploding of decades of storytelling and decades of characters and decades of artwork, and Araki imploding and exploding, right? In this final part, speculatively. Why is that important? Well, that's important because if this is the final part, whatever final part of JoJo it may be, whether it's 9 or 10, if there is a part 10, the late style of Araki and him going against conventional mediums and doing things that shouldn't work but do, having a career of changing his style and doing things that shouldn't work but do work anyway, off of sheer will alone, right? Off of sheer skill and writing talent, it's going to explode. And much like an imploding star, it's going to send ripples across the culture of writing, across comics, manga, and inspire a generation of artists to come. All because he was confident enough in this late style and confident enough in the planning of this series to end it on such a note that nobody could have expected, which is exactly what we all came here for. Now ain't that something? That's the video. Let me know if you guys enjoy this style of video. Let me know if you enjoyed me tackling other topics outside of it. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like. Check the links in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.